and welcome to the UNITAR Virtual Roundtable discussion for coding for social capital. My name is Alexander Taylor, and I'm your host today. Next slide, please. I am the president and founder of Artem NextGen, as well as the youth ambassadors of the Global Challenges Forum. And in partnership, we are hosting a 1M 2030 intergenerational discussion that features the aspects of social capital and how coding can be used to leverage better opportunities in society in the post-COVID-19 world. Our order for today will be Dr. Moses Strocker, Andrew Gao, Mashavi Shankar, Avi Schiffman, Malte Lauterbach, Sarah Griesdorf, Dr. Michelle Sun, starting our expert panel, Mr. Brandon Nicholson, Ms. Shashank Ray, and then we will enter a Q&A discussion with you, our audience. Next slide, please. So 1M 2030 is essentially a movement to empower social entrepreneurs and aspiring youth leaders around the world. Our goal is to try to reach 1 million youth leaders towards United Nations Sustainable Development Goals beyond 2030. Next slide. So I represent the 1M 2030 initiative as the Business Development Ambassador, as well as the Youth Ambassadors of the Global Challenges Forum Foundation, which is a foundation in in Switzerland. And our work is to try to help empower you as youth to have a platform to speak and to share. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So what is social capital? Well, social capital involves essentially the ability for one to access resources, information, and education through interpersonal relationships. Throughout this whole COVID-19 pandemic, there's been a loss of professional opportunities and jobs, and technology and coding have become instrumental not only in creating these new opportunities through the social capital, but aiding those who face socioeconomic inequalities and allowing for them to have greater access to new opportunities. Our youth today will be talking about the work that they do in the background of technology and coding and how they're leveraging their work to empower society into the future. Next slide. So I would like to go ahead and lead the transition to Dr. Moses Strocker, who is the Executive Director of the Global Resilience Consortium and the Associate Director of the Global Challenges Forum Foundation in Switzerland. He is the Associate Professor in Education and works with the School of Education and the International Office at Christ University, Bangalore in India. As a professional international education expert and researcher with a PhD in science, he's been closely working with IB schools, teacher training initiatives, as well as the Global Challenges Forum Foundation for over a decade now. He's an enthusiast in collaborations with UNITAR for creating awareness and implementation avenues for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. By influencing public policy through international networks, Dr. Moses, welcome, and looking forward to hear what you have to share with us today.
Thank you very much, Alexander, and my esteemed colleagues at the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, distinguished panelists, and members of the global audience. I'm going to speak about the concept of coding for social capital. Basically, I'm going to paint a picture, a big picture, a holistic integration of concept mapping and lateral thinking to elucidate this phenomenon. Next slide, please. So if you look at the definition of coding, and if you look at how science and technology combine a system of words, letters, figures, symbols, and languages used to represent others for classification or identification, orchestrated through machines, computers, artificial intelligence, and genetics. So basically, if you look at the technical definition of coding, it is the act of writing a set of instructions for the computer in order for the computer to carry out some functions or tasks very effectively. And this is how coding is helping man-machine interfaces in building up social capital. Now, what is social capital? The network of relationships, basically, among people who live and thrive and work together in a particular society, enabling that society to function effectively. Now, human capital is actually the stock and the building block of social capital. It is an individual perspective, and the definition is over there. And we have to unlock our potential as human beings in order to contribute to society for financial capital. That being said, human beings are priceless. This creates innovative environments. Now, if you look at machine code and genetic code for leveraging the human capital, you need to look at how machinery can encode instructions through programming and languages. So many kinds of programming languages have come into the market, and they are also useful for students and children at all age groups to learn and grow. But you need to understand that actually the human body is hardwired with a genetic code in itself. So you have purines and pyrimidines, building blocks known as deoxyribonucleic acid. These purines and pyrimidines are basically a sequence of alphabets, A, T, and GC. And there are combinations. There's a sugar phosphate backbone, and all of you will have studied the cell and how that gives rise to organs and tissues. So basically, the neuroscience of the brain is hardwired to receive information through alphabets, through symbols, through numbers, right from early childhood in the Broca and Wernicke's areas. So when we write a set of instructions for the computer and the machine to encode or decode and function effectively, you need to understand the relationship is reciprocal between man and machine interfaces. And you have these supercomputers and chips and all kinds of careers coming through because of coding for social capital to leverage how machines can enhance substantive financial gain in different countries. If you look at the anthropology of human beings, they have traversed through time and places across continents, and they have come through so many years of hard work. And today we have machines to help us. In the past, there weren't any machines. And the beauty in aesthetics to leverage human capital, to scaffold onto social capital, and thereby enhance the whole fabric of dynamic society. Next slide, please. Now, if you look at social capital, winning the race together, competing is good, but collaborating, that's the winning formula. There are riches in cultural identity, unity, and diversity. The concept of Ubuntu needs to be understood. I am because we are, or I am who I am because of you, and you are who you are because of me. So how we have this wonderful concept of humanity being depicted through this definition. A very interesting study on genetic analysis was carried out by Senator Elizabeth Warren. Over 160,000 Americans were analyzed, and the genetic structure was analyzed. And three compositions of populations, African Americans, Latinos, and European Americans. And they showed genome homology and heterogeneity. And they were startled to see that they were of a mixed race. So this is how it is. So I think we need to celebrate our differences because we all come from different backgrounds, and most of these Americans, almost all of them, had some, genetic influence of Native American gene structure. Next slide, please. So macroeconomics, using technology, machinery, and architecture for social change, industrialization, and national interests for national productivity and GDP fund allocation. So why is coding so important for children? Like I said, the human being any child is innately encoded with the DNA made up of alphabets. The genetic code is made up of alphabets. So we are hardwired to receiving information which is alphabetical, numerical, and symbolical. So children can automatically pick this up. It is good for analytical reasoning and critical thinking, creative thinking. It also gives them career opportunities in data science, which are fast growing, machine learning and big data. And you have all kinds of design processes and machinery that is used for data mining, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, so many careers, myriads of career and plethora of career avenues for these students to build up a very good social capital in their ecosystem and across the world. Next slide, please. Cutting edge technology can help create enriched environments. Children love these apps and game-based learning platforms, and the SDGs and social capital and happiness index. I mean, it's intriguing to see how, the whole aspect of enriched environments can create social capital, basically, and happiness quotient that is enumerated. Actually, you can measure this. There's also a gross domestic product, but there's also a gross national happiness quotient, and you need to study some of these things. And the SDGs, or the United Nations Sustainable Developmental Goals, they have to be taken very seriously. We have to personalize these for our students, for our children, for the younger generations, so that they can be empowered to make a change for human capital, for personalizing their own limitations and overcoming their limitations, and looking at how they can embark on social capital. Now let's personalize the Sustainable Developmental Goals. In 2015, they instituted these excellent goals, 17 of these goals, and all of them encompass aspects of economic, social, and environmental change. So people, planet, peace, prosperity, and partnerships are the focus areas. So let us look at how we can use these 17 goals to transform our worlds. This is transformative education. Next slide, please. Looking at social capital and a case study of social capital, the United Nations. This is a depiction of a conglomeration and a diversity of individuals from different nations, tribes, and tongues, and irrespective of gender, background, socioeconomic milieu, all converging together for public policy decisions, for governance, for fund allocation, for conflict resolution, decision-making, problem solving. And it's such a unique and dynamic model of Ubuntu. And if we have shared responsibilities and a good understanding and a positivity around this entire concept, we need to appreciate that this organization was set up in 1945 after the World War II with a very ennobling vision to promote peace, harmony, and prosperity. And we have had these 9 very distinguished Secretary Generals of the United Nations, starting with Trygve Lie from Norway, Dag Hammarskjöld from Sweden, U Thant from Myanmar, Kurt Waldheim from Austria, Javier de Hula from Peru, Boutros Ghali from Egypt, Kofi Annan from Ghana, and we have Ban Ki-moon from South Korea. At the moment, since 2017, we have Antonio Guterres from Portugal. See, they have such a dilemma sometimes and such a consensus building. I mean, there have been very empowered and prolific members of the intelligentsia, spiritually endowed and empowered to advise some of these organizations. And they have had discussions and deliberations on almost complex topics like navigating through absolutes and absolutes in a pluralistic society, or the search for absolutes in a world of relativism. So reconciliation of seemingly contradictory and opposite ideas, consensus building, dialectics. So this is essential for us to understand and express solidarity in all ways, to express solidarity so there is a uniformity in percolation of the ethos and vision and mission of the United Nations in different schools, colleges, universities, corporations, and different countries. Next slide, please. So the United Nations Institute for Training and Research is the training and research branch. This branch is very useful and very, I would say, specific with the training and research part of the United Nations. And the United Nations works with governments, research institutions, schools, universities, and NGOs to partner with networks for public policy, SDG projects, social welfare, upliftment of underprivileged, needy sections of society, fundraising, allotment, and conferencing like this, and in person, face to face, across the world. Certain components of international schooling and international education thankfully have understood the validity of some of the work that the UN is doing. And the International Baccalaureate Organization even has the Model United Nations. It has the creativity, activity, and service component to sensitize people and human beings for the peace, prosperity, and nurturing the biodiversity and ecosystem, and visits, expeditionary learning visits across the world, and also imbibing the culture and ethos of consensus building and living with diversity and international mindedness through their curriculum programs. So we are appreciative of this, and we encourage other national curriculum boards and other countries to take this seriously, even universities to come on board in promoting the SDGs for social capital. Next slide, please. So there are several avenues for enhancing SDGs, and there are so many, and the most important ones have already been enlisted in the SDG goals. You can go through this slide a little later, but I would like to request all of you to look at social capital and human capital, not as a phenomena, but try and personalize this. If you can take on the challenge of taking up one of these goals as your life's calling and vocation, and then get a group of people or friends, or look for like-minded individuals or organizations, work with them to build this social capital, it'll be more meaningful for you in your life. Next slide, please. Some of the projects that we are doing at the Global Challenges Forum Foundation, along with the United Nations Institute of Training and Research, are youth leadership, transformative education, looking at human capital, building social capital in the future. We want to have knowledge networking and public policy reforms, advisory and intergovernmental dialogue and diplomatic services offered. And we are looking and earmarking individuals and having such webinars in order to promote that. Next slide, please. Coding, man-made machine interfaces are here and here to stay. There's an evolving ecosystem. Today we are here on Earth, it is our home, that's great. But in the future, there could be future civilizations. Do you want to reach to the heavens? Why not? We can get there together. So let's look at this as strategic foresight. And thank you very much for this opportunity. And I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Moses. Thank you for the eloquent introduction into social capital, its pertinence, and the history of why we're doing what we're doing and how we're going to utilize this to empower youth in the future. I'd like to go ahead and make our transition to our fellow youth panelists. So firstly, I would like to introduce Andrew Gao, who is the founder of the Helix Initiative and the 1 in 2030 Ambassador for Communications. Andrew, welcome. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing everything you have to share with us.
Thank you for having me, Alexander. So, next slide. So today I'll be talking about coding for social capital and how technology can democratize education and increase educational opportunities for all. Next slide, please. So my name is Andrew Gao. I'm from San Diego, California. And as Alexander mentioned, I'm the GCF Ambassador for Communications and the founder of the Helix Initiative. My background is mainly in research and entrepreneurship. Next slide. So what is social capital? As Alexander and Dr. Moses mentioned before, it is the ability one has to access resources, information, and education through one's interpersonal relationships. Next slide. While COVID-19 has impacted social capital, as we all know, due to lockdown restrictions, not going to school for many students, etc., coding and technology have been used to create new opportunities for all. So before I get into the ways that we can use coding and technology to provide opportunities and build social capital, I'll first give some background about the vehicle through which I'm doing it, the Helix Initiative. The Helix Initiative is a nonprofit dedicated to providing STEM education to students for free namely in the areas of bioinformatics, biotechnology, things related to the life sciences. We currently have over 1,900 members across 25 countries, and we have over 30 chapters and more. We focus on STEM outreach, and so far we've impacted over 50,000 individuals. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, you can visit our website at helix.science. Next slide. So how can we use technology, for example, through the Helix initiative, to build social capital and increase opportunities? One, thanks to the internet, video streaming, things like that, websites, you can provide content and classes to anyone who has an internet connection, whether they be recorded on YouTube or live. Secondly, technology allows for effective communication and distribution of important information. Never before in history have we been able to share mass amounts of information so quickly with just a click, such as on Instagram. So the first example is the Helix free STEM classes. We've been offering free online science classes and math classes since April, and we use a variety of technological tools to do it. First, we use a website that is coded using languages like HTML, JS, and CSS as the face of our operation. So that is how people learn about our program and how they learn how to access the resources. And that the template for the website was generously created and provided by Lachlan Campbell. Additionally, we use Google Docs to store important resources. We use it to create lesson plans, schedules, and of course, storing the Zoom link information, Google Meets link information for our classes, which are run on Google Meets, as I mentioned. And after class, the recordings are uploaded to YouTube where they can be accessed basically forever afterwards by anyone. And finally, we use a tool called Typeform, which is similar to Google Forms and other form response softwares. And it allows us to rapidly gain feedback and also gain contact information about our students so we can learn how to serve them better in the future. So far, we've had over 200 students attend our STEM classes. And additionally, our second usage of technological tools to build social capital is through communications, because social capital is all about those interpersonal relationships. Personally, I started the Helix initiative because I felt that there was a lack of interpersonal relationships and social capital between high school STEM researchers, because although there are many of us, we're very disconnected and there's not many large organizations connecting us or large online communities. So first, the Helix initiative primarily uses a tool called Discord to host our community of nearly 2,000 members. And this allows us to have voice chats with hundreds of people to discuss things. We can have different channels for different things. We can have automatic robots perform specific tasks for us, such as reminding us of something every hour, or moderation, things like that. And additionally, we also use Instagram. We have about 1,400 followers, and we use our platform to spread messages about science and inspire people to be interested in STEM. Like, for example, we try to post fun facts about STEM. Our most recent one was about the mRNA COVID vaccine. We try to post those every 1 or 2 days, and we recently, thanks to a grant by the ACA, a local San Diego organization, we were able to launch a COVID-19 information campaign, which reached over 60,000 people in a few weeks. And that's one of the great uses of technology, is to educate and inform people through the internet. Finally, we use many tools such as Zapier, which is an automation tool that allows us to instantly connect different platforms. For example, when a new post is posted on Instagram about science, we can have it be displayed on our Discord so people know about it. And we also use Zapier to automate registrations for events such as our hackathons. And our hackathons are another really great way to build social capital. Hackathons are essentially where students get together in teams and they work on creating a completely new product using code, such as a website or an app or even a robot. And Helix really we love to host hackathons, and we're hosting one in December, and there's already $120,000 in prizes available, as well as prizes for everyone who enters. So you should definitely check that out if you're interested in learning how to code. So hackathons are great because it builds a great sense of community amongst student coders, and additionally, they're a great way to use your abilities and apply them to an actual project. And of course, we all know that coding is part of the future. Coding is going to be already one of the next big things. And it's important that many people learn how to code so they can find success in the job market, things like that, and even just for use in their own daily lives. So what are some impacts of coding and technology? Well, coding and technology are what built all the amazing platforms such as Google Docs and Typeform that support organizations like Helix to do our mission. So providing free online live STEM classes, a YouTube channel with 100+ hours of free educational content, our educational blog and podcast, our COVID-19 posts, the number was 80,000. And we even have an online Bound for Medics camp and an online research program, which is again building social capital by providing students who otherwise don't have access to STEM research opportunities the access they need. And we even provide mentor matching to help students get mentors. We additionally use coded platforms such as Zoom to host online events such as the International Youth Research Summit, which was a weekend-long conference for students to present their research and meet each other. And finally, of course, we have our hackathons, which are a great way to introduce coding to students in a fun yet competitive environment. And you can learn more about the hackathon at nucleotidehack.com. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. If you have questions about what I do or what I spoke about, feel free to email me or connect on LinkedIn. And I encourage you to check out the Helix websites for more information.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for helping to democratize education and providing access and opportunities to individuals throughout the United States and around the world to have access to things they would not have, resources that they would not have otherwise. Very important, especially in the COVID-19 situation we're in currently. Our next speaker is, I believe we're going to move forward with Avi Schiffman, if I'm correct, to our next speaker. Mashavi is here. Okay, wonderful. I would like to go ahead and move forward with Mashavi Shankar, who is the Forbes Asia 30 Under 30 co-founder and CEO of Space Basic. She is a social entrepreneur and has a lot to share with us today. So Mashavi, welcome. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Mashavi, you're muted. We can't hear you. Can you check your microphone for us, please? All right, try one more time for us again, please. All right, I would like to go ahead and move forward with Avi and then revert back to Mashavi. Hopefully we can get our communications microphone fixed by then. So let's go ahead and move forward with the next presentation and revert back and make sure that Mashavi has an opportunity to present once we're able to hear her properly.
Cool. Hi, I'm Avi Schiffman, and I'm the creator of ncov2019.live, which is a coronavirus tracking website that is one of the biggest in the entire world. It's used by like actual governments and all kinds of scientists and universities and all kinds of people all around the world every single day. During the peak, there was about 30 million unique visitors every single day. And in total, about, I don't know, like over 1 billion something unique visitors. It's gotten pretty wild. And I guess the reason why I made this website is because I was curious on just information on the COVID-19 pandemic. Oh, it wasn't even a pandemic at the time. In fact, the name ncov2019.live is a terrible domain. But one of the reasons why it's called that is because I started this when there wasn't like a name for the virus. That was kind of like an unofficial name. So it wasn't called COVID-19 yet. So that's kind of the reason why that name exists. And when I started this website, it was kind of late December, early January. I don't really remember when. And I was just kind of curious for information on the pandemic. But the only place I could find numbers that were updated was like Chinese government websites, because it was mainly in China back then. or, news articles, but they were mostly out of date by the time I read them anyways. And, they're not like dynamically updating or anything like that. So, I procrastinated from a bigger project and I started working on this website, and I finished the first version of it in a couple days. And I posted it online, and then eventually people were like, oh, this is cool. The virus also continued to spread, become a big deal. There are more news articles and stuff about it, but I had this website, and a lot of the beginning of it was a lot of like, I guess, guerrilla marketing and stuff too, in a way. I don't know if it's called marketing, but people would be like, what are the most up-to-date numbers on the coronavirus? And be like, oh, I know the perfect website for that. Here's this website. And, especially back then, now, I used to check my website like every single day. Now I don't really anymore, but, because it used to be a big deal. I used to have something that was also tracking, how many, cases, how many new countries like total were infected, and every single day would be like a couple new countries were infected and stuff, and they were like real countries too, like really big ones, like France and stuff, and that was like a kind of crazy thing to see. So yeah, so I basically just made this website, and then I posted it, and people really liked it, and so there was like some news articles about it and stuff, and that kind of made it kind of explode a lot more internationally. So now there's like, I don't know, there's like hundreds, if not like thousands of like international news kind of just things on this website. And so many people, there's so many like random places that use this website and like really big deals. Like some dude sent me on like Instagram, in like South America, no, South Africa, they like on like their government like TV stuff, they have like the map on my website just like displayed for like everyone in South Africa, which was like really strange. And like the Bosnian government apparently uses my website. Like just so many like places that use this site. So it's pretty cool. And so, I mean, what the website does really, if I haven't really said that, is that it just, let's say Korea, for example, or something like that. You want to know how many, cases there are, stuff and all that, and, how many deaths and recovered and active cases. So you're, basically providing the raw data for all of these scientists and whatever to make their own models on, I don't know, what's it going to be in the future and all this kind of stuff. And one thing that's nice about it too is that a lot of the government websites before were very terrible. I mean, it was kind of just impossible to use a lot of them on a mobile device too. A lot of the government websites looked like they were made, a gazillion years ago before there were, modern technology. And especially with, smartphones, like 80% of my traffic is from mobile devices. And so I kind of designed the website to work very well on a phone from the first place. So for example, if you visit the website on a mobile device, the first thing you see is just the quick facts section. So you see the total confirmed cases, the total deceased, the total serious, total recovered, total vaccines in development, et cetera. All that kind of information is just right there at a glance. You don't have to go hunting around the internet to all kinds of different government websites. It's literally the first thing you see. And a lot of people just want that, at a glance. And then you can scroll down and see breakdowns of the, United States and, all kinds of other countries and all that kind of stuff. You can, click to favorite your ones that you're interested in, there's all kinds of stuff. And I guess also how it works. So I guess you can use Korea again, for example. A lot of just these government kind of places, all this information is publicly available. It's just not all in one place, really. So for Korea, for example, they have like a table of numbers about, I don't know, they update that every couple hours or whatever of just, Korean like localized information. And so what I'm able to do is use a technology called web scraping. It's kind of what Google uses for, making the search engine work. It's called web crawling also. You may have heard of that. But basically I'm able to download that web page, and then it's all HTML and everything. And then I can parse that. So if they have a table, I can loop through all the different table columns and all that kind of stuff. And, it's really complicated. There's like 200 something web scrapers for this website. I think 237, which is a lot of work. These days it's gotten a lot easier to maintain. There's a lot of fail safes in this site, but I've remade this entire website like 5 or 6 times. I mean, the user doesn't see anything that different, but the entire back end of this is so complicated and been done so many times because you need to have really good servers when there's like a constant stream of just millions of people every single day. So I've learned a lot about interesting ways to deal with just real world programming. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you learn from working on a project like this that you can't learn from just working on simple things. And it's also been like really cool to inspire a lot of other young people to do interesting things with technology. I have a lot of people just messaging me like, hey, this is a coronavirus tracker I made for my local community, or, you know, this and that. And it was just all kinds of people. So it's been pretty cool to just, you know, make such a big website, I guess. And it's helped a lot of people. There's, you know, a lot of people that are, you know, like a while ago, there was this interesting story where there was this like American guy that was in China, or Beijing at the time. And they went into lockdown or whatever, and like he couldn't leave. And so he was stuck in like Beijing. And everyone was just speaking Chinese, and, you know, he doesn't speak Chinese. And this, all this kind of stuff was happening. And he couldn't find really any information. You know, anyone he would talk to would just kind of like yell at him in Chinese. So he was happy to find my website that was, you know, in whatever language he wanted, I guess, and just, you know, all the information, you know, that was I mean, the website is, you know, the real actual numbers are probably like, you know, 50, 100 times more than they really are. But, you know, you're able to see the actual confirmed numbers from the governments that is publicly available. And so he thought that was pretty comforting, and I thought that was pretty cool, just to be able to help just so many people. I mean, a lot of people, you know, visit the website because they have family that's all around the world. You know, they have a son that's in, I don't know, let's say the Caribbean, their daughter is in Vietnam or something like that. And instead of, you know, visiting these websites in languages they probably don't speak, you know, it's all just in whatever language they want, centralized to them. They just can see everything, you know, just at a glance. And I think just that kind of information that should be very easily accessible, especially during a, you know, time like a pandemic. And, you know, a lot of people, you know, I've liked it. Even Dr. Fauci, he kind of endorsed it and everything like that too, which was pretty cool. Yeah, so I guess that's my website and what I've created for Social Capital. So.
Thank you so much, Avi. And we appreciate your work, not only with your website, but also as our tech ambassador here at OneUp 2030, empowering youth, taking the initiative that you have done and using it to empower other youth leaders around the world. So thank you. And thank you for your presentation. I would like to test if Mashavi, can we test your mic real quick?
Hi, Alexander, can you hear me okay?
Can we hear you?
Hi, can you hear me, Alexander?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you. Well,
perfect.
We're so happy to have you, and we're happy that you're, you know, we're aligned. So let's go ahead and pull up your presentation. We would really like for you to have opportunity to speak. Mashavi, as I mentioned earlier, is a Forbes Asia 30 Under 30 and the co-founder and CEO of Space Basic. Before we enter into her discussion, I would like to encourage all our viewers to please add comments and tell us your thoughts and encourage questions, because we're going to be having our Q&A session later on, where we will try to take and apply your questions to our fellow panelists. Additionally, which is something we haven't done before, we'd also like to encourage our panelists to feel free to add questions to any other panelists in the Q&A in case you guys, you all have any curiosity. So feel free to do that. Follow OneUp 2030 on our social media pages. And Mashavi, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much. My name is Madhavi Shankar, and I'm the CEO, co-founder of Space Basic. So let me give you a little insight into my story. My main inspiration in creating Space Basic, besides my love for startups, was my passion to create change with the use of technology in the education sector here in India. You know, after studying and working in Australia, I could draw a clear difference in my student experiences that I had in both countries. So, you know, I went back to India, and during my course of due diligence back in 2016, you know, what we realized was the student housing community was managed in a very ad hoc manner with little or almost no use of technology adoption. So, you know, today there's so many networking platforms that allow you to connect with friends and family, or even build and manage, you know, business networks and business connects. So keeping that in mind, we knew that there was a better way, and that's where Space Basic comes in. Today, Space Basic is used by students, by staff, by parents, you know, by members in housing communities to kind of easily connect and easily communicate while carrying out day-to-day tasks. You know, and our goal ever since has been to digitize living experiences. And personally, I'm very glad that, we are helping people stay connected at all times. Next slide, please. Working with building communities via technology has really helped me take notice of the power of technology, in our day-to-day lives. And it's incredible how integral it's become. It's almost a default action for us a reflex action for us to pick up our phones and check it every few minutes. And technology, I mean, think about the sector, think about the field. It impacts our day-to-day life, from cars to cell phones to computers to networks, and the list goes on and on. And, it's true that faster communication and instant connections have been made possible simply with the use of our mobile phones and internet. Next slide, please. I'm sure we all are aware of countless examples of community building, resilience through the use of technology. Now, it can be building resilience through connecting resources and ideas. It could be connecting innovators and volunteers. It could be connecting people who are looking for help with those who are offering help. I mean, think about how without Facebook or without Instagram, we might not have even been able to stay connected with our family or friends who are overseas. Or, maybe without the neighborhood app, we wouldn't have acknowledged the new neighbor down the street. So technology as a community connector has mobilized nations to solve complex societal challenges. And let's take COVID, for example. I mean, there's no bigger example than COVID. Next slide, please. So, can you imagine for a second that how it would feel to have absolutely no access to technology during the COVID lockdown? I mean, that would probably be my biggest nightmare. And, today technology has uniquely positioned us to quickly learn and to quickly respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. And throughout the crisis, right, technology has become, I believe, a connective tissue to our physically distant lives. We make video calls for work, or all the way, video calls to check in on our families. It's incredible how it's become the crux of day to day. And a recent study showed that 37% of, 37% people felt neighbors have become more important in their lives during COVID. And I believe that, the social isolation is definitely a side effect of this crisis, but technology has become the medicine in a way. Next slide, please. So the backbone of all this innovation is the code that builds it. Every machine, every device we use, relies heavily somewhere along the lines of coding. And, with the world that's becoming more increasingly digital, most of us struggle to do our jobs without the use of technology. And I believe that coding is the new language that will connect the globe. And as of today, it's never been easier to learn code, and I think it's something that is definitely being introduced in from kids. I was a part of a pitch fest for kids, and coding was the language, and we had kids from 2-3 years old, all the way to like 2021 who were introduced to coding, and it's incredible to see, the involvement and the urge to learn coding. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite quotes, and it says, "Learning to code is learning to create and innovate." And I absolutely cannot agree more. And, it's just a matter of time before coding becomes an integral part of our day-to-day lives, which we already see happening. So, coding is the language that's going to connect the globes and nations. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Mashabi. I appreciate your time sharing with us and all the work that you currently do. We are going ahead and making a quick transition to our slides due to the altercation before, but we're now going to transition to Malte Lauterbach. He was the previous PR manager at reply.it and managed over 1 million users and interacted with them directly to try to provide more optimal user experience. Malte, welcome. We look forward to hearing what you have to share with us today, and we appreciate your time. Malte, is your mic on mute? I think we have trouble hearing you.
Oh, sorry, Alexander. Hello, thanks, Alexander. Okay. Hey, I'm Malte Lauterbach. I'm 70 years old and I go to high school in Germany. In my free time, I work as a community manager for an American NGO and I lead a podcast focused on climate change and eco-politics. Before we start, I have 2 questions for you. A, for the audience. Did you ever participate in a hackathon? And B, did you ever participate in a hackathon focused on any social issue? Yeah, I'm gonna come back to these questions later. Yes, 1 year ago, I asked Amjad Maza, the founder of Replit, about his advice for a young person wanting to create and shape the future. He's probably not remembering the answer anymore, but it stuck with me. He said, how, given the correct tool set and equal chances, everyone can shape the future. New slide, please. Next slide, please. Thanks. 3 months later, I started at Replit after a cold mail to him again. And I met teenagers, students, young founders, hackers and leaders, and programmers, and more. 2 slides back, please. I began to embrace what I learned, and I developed my own definition of it. In this fast-changing, fast-scaling world, everyone can shape and change the world and the future because of the impact the person has. During the work at Replit, I was also in charge of running online-only hackathons. This year, in March, we ran a COVID-19 themed hackathon, and the project we received were amazing. Impressive ideas were created in the short time span of only 3 days. Next slide, please. From COVID-19 safety-themed games to tools dedicated for finding out which shop in the country still has toilet paper in-house, to tools identifying face touching with neural networks. Everyone had the chance to create in groups. So we had lots of amazing projects. Next slide, please. Project that got the most, that was pretty amazing, were created by teams of persons, not by a single person. So that showed that everyone giving a chance to create in groups has a better impact. Even in a more bigger scale, Germany's government's health department hosted a hackathon with over 1.5 K submissions by 20,000 users. And that's the biggest hackathon ever hosted by a government. This was in June. This will be exemplary for how hackathons will work in the future on such a large scale. The projects created by these groups in this hackathon by the German health department are still heavily used by persons in Germany and have an impact because they can help. They can help with the current situation. This had finally convinced that everyone, given the right group and tools, has a chance to shape and change. Hackathons about social and or economic issues are rare, as showed by the poll, as we see here. 74% of all the votees in this audience said that they never participated in a hackathon focused on social issue. I believe we need to change this, and that's also a point why I'm here and talking about this today. I believe that we need to amplify these hackathons. We need to host more of these hackathons, and we need to have more hackathons focused on these issues. Yes. How can strong communities advance social goals is the next question. And next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, before I begin, what is community for you? Please think of this in yourself, you don't need to edit this. For me, community is a place where I can get together with other like-minded people, where I can exchange with them to extend my own abilities, with my own knowledge, but also to teach my skills and to learn from others. I asked Zach Letter, founder of one of the most influential communities for teenagers in CS and computer science, Hack Club, for his definition of what Hack Club is doing, and he said, I think that in many ways, what Hack Club is trying to do is build a modern adaptation of the Boy and Girl Scouts for the 21st century. This extremely summarizes what communities need to be. That's why we need strong community leaders. Next slide, please. I believe that, and it is fact that in a strong community that creates group cohesion, that enables users to learn from each. On the other hand, teaching others in community that causes positive peer pressure, that enables users to explore and create with others, for others. A good community leader is able to use and amplify this peer pressure to solve social problems. In fact, as an example in hackathons or as a group fixed on this issue. New slide, please. We as teenagers that have not taken part in an establishment, that are flexible, have inspiration, motivation, that are responsible to lead communities, to solve social issues, or to at least steer public and political discussion to these issues. In Germany, we have a saying that says, Rome wasn't built in one day. I'd like to extend this saying to, Rome wasn't built in one day, and neither by a single human. Next slide, please. One last thing. Don't forget that peer pressure is like a blade. It's an extremely mighty tool to have. But if its owner fails to control, it will cut them. Because the pressure can get too high. Let's change this world for good. Thanks for listening to my speech.
Thank you so much, Malte. We appreciate you sharing all of that with us, incentivizing, utilizing hackathons for social good. I would like to go ahead and lead this transition to Sarah Griesdorf, who is the CEO and founder of Hodet, and also the director, or former director of Boston Hacks and BU Sparks. Has done some great work. We're looking forward to hearing more about what Sarah has to share with us today. Sarah, welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Alexander. As Alexander said, my name is Sarah Griesdorf, and I'm the CEO and founder of Hodet. And today I'm going to talk about how I've utilized my interests and passions to bring about social change. Next slide, please. It all started when I was in 10th grade in 2015. I attended my very first hackathon, which was called Code Day. You all are, thanks to my colleagues, familiar with hackathons now, but they're basically 12 to 36-hour programming competitions where you work on a team of 4 to 5 people to build an app or a website or some other kind of technical project. This was the first time that I was having a chance to apply the technical skills that I had started learning in school to a real-world application. I think the app we built that weekend was basically supposed to help you find veterinary offices, but in the end kind of ended up being Google with our name slapped on the top of it. Regardless, we ended up walking away from that event with the best app certificate, and I had the motivation and the drive to want to attend hackathons going forward. I ended up attending many more throughout my time in high school, and knew that when I got to college, I wanted to create opportunities for students to apply the skills that they were learning to real world projects as well. Next slide, please. I ended up attending Boston University, where I studied computer science with a minor in innovation and entrepreneurship. I chose to go to BU because it was in a big city and one that was full of college students who all were passionate about various things and brought their diverse perspectives to this one city. I quickly got involved in the computer science department at BU. It was my second day in college that I emailed the director of Boston University's hackathon, Boston Hacks, at the time with my resume and all the reasons that I wanted to join the hackathon organizing team. And luckily he let me on, so I was very quickly involved. Next slide, please. My freshman year, I served as just a general member, helping out where I could. I then served as the head of marketing and then finally became the director of the event myself. I was able to work with this team of 40 people, much more than the teams of 4 to 5 that I had worked on when I was participating in the hackathons myself, to bring about this event for over 600 people. We pulled together noted speakers, workshops, mentors, and volunteers to help students who were learning this theoretical computer science and apply it to projects that they were passionate about, giving them a chance to learn how their interests intersected with the skills that they were developing. I was also able to work with this team of 40 people, as I said, who were all coming from various places and brought their unique perspectives, but were all motivated to put on the event together. And so while I was helping other people find ways to come up with solutions to the ideas that they had, I had my own idea that I was working on as well. Next slide, please. It all started during my time in college when I realized that every time I left the house, I had to carry my phone and my keys in my wallet in my hands or in a purse. And I realized that my male friends never had to do this because they had pockets deep enough to carry all of their belongings. And the more that I learned about this issue, the more I realized that while women's pockets are small, this problem is actually quite big. In fact, women's pockets on average are 48% shorter than men's pockets, holding women back from being able to just carry their belongings and proceed on with their day. And so the more that I talked about it with my friends, the more that I realized that they were experiencing this issue just like I was and encouraged me to do something about it. As I was studying computer science, my skill set at the time was very technically focused. And so utilizing that, I decided to try to solve the issue the best I could. Next slide, please. I started by building a website which aggregated women's clothes with functional pockets from around the internet. I did lots of customer interviews, market research, got to understand the people that I wanted to target with this issue, and ended up getting 5,000 website views without really doing any ads. However, just because you are passionate about something doesn't mean you're necessarily always on the right path to solve it at first. And so after doing all these customer interviews and research, I realized I was going to need to pivot. Next slide, please. I ended up last May deciding to launch my own clothing line, professional workwear with real pockets for women. We are now getting ready to produce our first line of women's suits, which will have 8 functional pockets as opposed to typical suits, which can't even hold a woman's phone. While my skill set was originally very technically focused, I had to learn a lot of new skills to be able to do this with the support of many people along the way. I was able to apply that collaborative learning that I had learned before to help me develop this new product. And as I was going, it became clear that I wasn't going to be able to just drive this myself. Next slide, please. And so I started to develop a community around me. Pictured here are some of my team members and some of our larger community members. Just as I had learned through my hackathon experience, the more diverse perspectives that we were able to bring together, the more that we were going to be able to get done. And so working with all of them, we went from concept to final product and are now getting ready to start manufacturing in Los Angeles. But getting an idea off the ground is certainly not free. And so I began thinking about ways to fund my idea that could kind of capitalize on that, those social connections that I had made. And so I came across the concept of crowdfunding. I was especially excited about crowdfunding because the funding landscape as it exists right now is heavily male dominated, with 98% of venture capital dollars going to men and the large majority of entrepreneurs being men. And so I wanted to seek out a way to fund my business that was authentic to the values that we had set up, being very female empowerment focused. And so I ended up settling on a platform called I Fund Women. Next slide, please. We raised on I Fund Women, which is kind of like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, but for female-founded companies. They actually reinvest 20% of the fees that they make through crowdfunding back into the companies that raise on their platform. We set an initial goal of $25,000 and ended up raising just over $28,000, making it a very successful campaign. But obviously I did not do this alone, and you can see we have almost 300 donors that made this possible. And it was really those skills that I had learned along the way. And while I wasn't coding anymore, the same skills that I had learned, the problem solving, the creativity, the teamwork, that really made this possible. And I learned how to utilize all of that to make this new passion that I had, this solving women's pockets issue, come to life, even though it wasn't a technical solution in the end. And so I implore you to think about the ways that your interests and skills and passions can be utilized to bring about change with something that you're passionate about and that you can rally others around you to solve as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you for sharing to us how you've utilized the social capital of your communities and resources, as well as your experiences at Boston University, to create a great project that addresses a social issue and bring about a new outcome that changes the narrative. We would like to go ahead and transition to our senior experts. Before we go and proceed, I'd like to thank everyone who's been asking questions and putting them on the chat. For those who have inputted in, we look forward to incorporating some of these in our Q&A discussion after our senior experts. Transitioning to our senior experts, we would like to first introduce Ms. Michelle Sun. Next slide, please. Who is the founder and of the First Code Academy. So Michelle, welcome. We're really happy to have you here, and we're very grateful for your help working to try to initiate this webinar and further projects in the future with our 1M 2030 initiative to help empower youth.
Thank you, Alexander. Hi, everyone. So I'm really excited to share about this topic, and I'm the founder of First Code Academy, and we've been teaching kids how to code since 2013. And this topic of social capital and social good is really close to my heart, where let me just start off with diving into the definition of social capital. Next slide, please. So social capital is essentially defined as networks together that are shared with shared norms and values and understanding to facilitate cooperation amongst groups. And this term was first coined back in the 1890s. And next slide, please. It facilitates cooperation, exchange, and innovation. At the same time, it also reinforces certain stigma and dominance and privilege that are helping society be more stable. So here's a picture of, next slide, please. Yeah. So if you go, yeah, so here's a picture of the 1890s in New York City, where, people are essentially, gathering with who they know, like the family they're born into, and it's really about like a close social network. And today, next slide, please. Today, this is how social capital looks like digitally, professionally, and people are mingling on networks like LinkedIn. Next slide, please. And what is evolving into in professional world is also the gig economy, including like Fiverr and Upwork, where people are increasingly able to go outside of their jobs and actually become their own boss and starting to have their clients from from all around the world, just based on their quality of the work and the reviews that they're getting. Next slide, please. And more evolving forward, more and more we're seeing this term called passion economy. And passion economy, people are saying that this is the next step away from the gig economy, which is from Fiverr and Upwork, the websites that I showed in the previous slides. So people are increasingly becoming creators on the internet, like YouTube, or even just being a thought leader on Twitter. And the website at the bottom is Patreon, which is a website that creators like YouTubers can actually sell their memberships, and people can pay for premium content by supporting their creators on Patreon. So I believe that social capital is rapidly evolving in this AI first generation. The social capital is evolving from who we know, the family, the network that we're born into, or into what we create and how we share it and how we amplify it. And that's where I believe coding really comes in, where the power of technology is really greatly harnessed by the ability to code. So one example that we have is, I can share a bit of examples from our previous students that learned to code, where one student have learned to code because she is very passionate about fashion, and she wanted to learn how to code and program her future fashion runway with the lights and music that coordinates with the models on the runway, their movements, and to coordinate it with the lights and music. And this is very doable with motion sensing technology and the light programming technologies out there today already. Another student that learned how to code, she goes on to create her app to help Alzheimer's patients to live better lives. And that was inspired by her grandmother, who has suffered Alzheimer's disease, and she really wants to support her life as her memory deteriorates. And that's really how she's using technology and coding to help her community and help someone she loves dearly. And I believe that coding and technology equals to the power to build. And in this AI first generation, we are more and more rewarding builders in this world. And as the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz recently published an article, they say that this is the time to build. Like with this challenging time globally with coronavirus, we really need more builders in this world to make changes in our own respective community. So yeah, I want to share a couple of tools that are democratizing ways that we can build without too much understanding of coding. You can actually do a lot already. So I highly encourage us to spend some time to look into these tools. So Zapier, Typeform, and Airtable are really cool tools, really beautifully made tools that are democratizing data from the collection standpoint to how data flows on the internet, and also how you store data without using a traditional database. Next slide, please. And then there's also companies that are doing so much all around the world to democratize payments. In this audience, maybe there's a lot of different people calling in from the world, and we may not have the same access to payments, accepting payments, and sending out payments. And that's traditionally a huge friction point in developing countries to get to reach customers. And I'm sure there are a lot of different startups in all around the world with mobile payments, and these are the more developed countries websites. At the same time, do pay attention to this space, where I believe that democratizing payment can really help leapfrogging a lot of countries' development and empowering a lot more entrepreneurs in areas historically not touched by technology. And lastly, there's also democratizing commerce. So, obviously Shopify and Instacart is doing really well. And there's a Chinese company called Pinduoduo that's really cool as well that do a lot of live streaming and also group buying with discounts of daily goods. And I think these are really inspiring examples of how we can use innovative business model to empower more commerce activities using technology. So yeah, that's pretty much wrap up my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you sharing tools and resources that our audience can use and directly apply in order to develop and grow their social enterprises now and into the future. And thank you for everything First Code Academy does. I would like to encourage our fellow visitors as well to continue this conversation. This conversation is on the internet, and therefore it is going to be lasting, not just today, but it's going to be a conversation that's ongoing. So follow us on our social media pages at 1M2030 on Twitter and be at 1M2030, and continue the conversation. And we will love to include you potentially in future webinars, future conversations, as well as future activities. I would like to go ahead and lead the transition to Mr. Brandon Nicholson, who is the Executive Director of the Hidden Genius Project, which is a very pertinent project, especially given all the news recently that's working to empower minority youth towards technology. Welcome. You are on mute.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Brandon Nicholson. I'm Executive Director of the Hidden Genius Project. Next slide, please. And so today, I'd like to talk to you just and provide a little encouragement to communities and young people around how we do our work to encourage young people to explore technology. And of course, it's entitled Do You, which may seem ironic given that we're discussing social capital, and so many of our fantastic presenters, and particularly our youth panelists, spoke about engaging community solutions. And so what I'll say is this is actually, I think, rooted in the same emphasis and rooted in the same intent. And yet what I would submit is that it's very difficult to develop a community solution of any magnitude without first understanding who we are, first understanding what our love and our passion is, what our strength is, and then first understanding how passion and love and strength can then carry us forward in order to develop a meaningful solution. And you heard some great examples from our youth panelists, and even Sarah mentioned, it can't be passion alone, but it certainly starts there, right? And that's how you get the energy then to problem solve and get the technical expertise. Next slide, please. Just a quick bit about us. The Hidden Genius Project trains and mentors Black male youth in technology creation, entrepreneurship, and leadership skills to transform their lives and communities. We are about 8 years old now, founded in Oakland, California, in the United States. We are an organization that was first built on a volunteer power with the intent of empowering young people and Black male youth. Our first cohort we ever served was 5 young men in high school who committed to a 2-year cohort with us. And our core program is our cohort-based program, where young people learn the fundamentals of computer science and full stack software development, but also business entrepreneurship and leadership as well. Over time, though, we've been able to expand the work we've been able to do in our offerings. And we're able to reach a much broader population, still focused on our Black male youth population. But one of the greatest outputs of our work, of which I'm most proud, is that we've been able to train alumni of our program as youth educators and facilitators. And that's allowed us to actually deploy those youth alumni to be able to engage young people across backgrounds, and really not just young people. We're now serving individuals as young as 5 years old and as old as 80 in different capacities, thanks to our young people who are leading that work. So really excited about that. Next slide, please. And just kind of a visual around who we are and what we do, working with our young people in our most intensive programming. We've seen some great results in terms of our ability to retain those young people, help them to graduate high school or secondary school and enter into post-secondary education in university or college, as it were. And so we've been able to go from serving 5 young people in our first year to serving over 7,000. So we're really proud of that. Next slide, please. And so, all right, I think I may have had a bit of a formatting issue, so you'll see I'm back to the uniform format, which is fine. But just want to make a few quick points. First, around who owns technology. Just want to make sure that as we have the conversation today, we always remember that technology is not the domain, of any one community, any one group of peoples, etc. It's actually it's a word really that describes each of us as human beings, our daily struggle to problem solve and identify solutions in our lives that can help make our lives and our communities better. That, of course, can be anything from a simple implement, such as a writing implement, right? A pencil or a pen, or something as, as extravagant as a supercomputer or a space shuttle, right? And everything in between. Technology are implements intended to help us solve problems. And we absolutely then are naturally technologists. Each of us are taking different approaches, and some of us have had more formal training than others. But at the end of the day, technology is our domain. All of us, you could say own it, or you could say it's open source if you feel more comfortable that way, but it's certainly shared ownership. And so each of us has something to contribute. And I saw, a couple questions in the Q&A related to how to engage and explore technology in the context of limited resources and extremely limited resources, living in communities of extreme poverty. I think the number one thing we always convey to our young people is, because you're starting with you, if that's why we talk about do you, if we start with this idea that you matter the most in your own technological, and that you understand technology is not a domain that means you have to get caught up to the Western world, up to Silicon Valley, or caught up to white male engineers, or whatever maybe the archetype in your head is of who owns technology. If you don't see yourself as having to get caught up to anyone so much as you're providing your own individual contributions and open source contributions to technology and technological solutions, then you can feel confident that you have an opportunity to contribute and manipulate whatever those solutions are, even in your own context. And so I am positive that as individuals who've entered those questions in the chat today, or even as they're entering those questions, that they're seeing passing by them today some fantastic technological innovations, people who found ways to transport things, or if people found ways to keep power running, or people found ways sometimes to shift ownership of power, as I've learned in certain communities. Those are all brilliant technological innovations that start with just a fundamental need and understanding of self. Once we understand that, and once we start there, we can then tend to expand beyond that place and continue to put limits and learn more. But we don't have to only learn in the context of what's available to us. Next slide. What do you love, and what is your superpower? And I think those are the two most important questions. And I had at one point thought about, putting a corny image of, either a superhero or some things that you might love as young people. But the reality is, we're talking about a world full of billions of people. Each of us loves different things, even when we're the same age or we look very similar, but we might come from, 6,000 miles apart. And so I don't need to put anything here. You know what you love. I think again, I think back to Sarah's example, and I think back just to the idea that whatever my passion is, just to begin with, that's the greatest place to start. You know, I read an article yesterday about a company with someone who has a passion for shoes, and you know, people may say, well, that seems vain or what have you, but in this particular case, you know, this person's passion for shoes, they'd also were a veteran and an amputee, and so you know, one of their legs had been amputated or cut off, as it were, as a result of an injury sustained in battle. And they found that as an amputee, they're always buying two shoes, right? And then having to discard one. And they also were very much aware of people who, you know, had 2 feet that were different sizes and had to buy 2 pair of shoes and then discard one of each of the pair to have the proper size for each of their feet. So they started a company that would either sell an individual just a single shoe or 2 shoes of differing sizes. You can't tell me that that's not a community solution. You can't tell me that that's not supporting development of social capital. You can't tell me that that's not an act of gratitude to support those who've you know, raised their hands and made a sacrifice to serve their countries, right? And so it just starts with, if someone, you know, I wouldn't have come up with that solution. I probably don't love shoes as much as that person, or I haven't had that same experience. So what I love or what matters to me most, doing me can absolutely be the ground, you know, the ground level for, or the foundation for supporting a much larger population. And of course, what is your superpower? And so sometimes, you know, we'll think about technology from this standpoint of building, and we, of course, we've referenced a great deal about coding and building websites, building software, et cetera. And yet, if my superpower is in connecting, you know, any of the solutions you heard about earlier today, any of these great young technologists you got to meet, as they continue to grow and build, they need a team of people who are even smarter than they are, or have even greater perspective, or have even a broader skill set. And so, you know, if you're inspired by someone you heard earlier today, and you say to yourself, man, that could never be me, and it's not because I don't think I can do it, excuse me, it's just that I don't want, just that I don't really enjoy sitting, you know, with the text editor and writing lines of code for hours on end, that may be the case, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. It may be that your superpower is actually empowering businesses, you know, started by folks who do have that passion to grow and expand. You may be a beautiful designer, you know, you may have a beautiful knack for graphic arts, and to understand how to code, for example, at a base level will help you understand how these things operate and work, how you could be a great designer for, you know, the COVID-19, right, data response, how to even improve the data, not just the data science, but the actual user experience, you know, around that site, especially if South African, you know, news outlets are going to be using it, right, to display to entire countries. How can you make it even better? You know, engineers and people who first create technological solutions are not, you know, they're not all knowing and all seeing. We're all human beings with set of skills, and each of us tries to learn and learn more, but there's an infinite number of things we can learn. So whatever your superpower is, that can be the thing that contributes to a great technological solution. And again, if you're operating in the context of great scarcity, great resource scarcity, that doesn't have to be the limiting factor. You may be, with what you have available, the person to help advance some of the most sophisticated technological developments, just because your way of thinking about problems, just because maybe you're a great connector and you know how to build teams, and you're saying, well, listen, if this thing is going to work in Kenya, then I'm going to need to bring some of my colleagues from Kenya to connect with some of my colleagues from Switzerland to, you know, possibly do some of the material development in China, and possibly some of the marketing in the United States, what have you. You know, there's such a premium right now for people who can communicate well, understand, empathize, and build teams together. Next slide. And finally, just I would ask, just what's transferable? What's transferable for you? So if you have a superpower, if you have a love, it may start with shoes or what have you. But as you learn to develop a solution for, carrying items or for COVID-19 and COVID-19 passes, and you hope that it doesn't become COVID-21, is there another skill, another context in which we can apply this skill, apply your superpower, apply your passion and your interests? And if, of course, for your benefit as an individual, as someone who hopes to have, a long sustained career, multiple careers, but also for the betterment of our community and society. We hope that the COVID-19 website becomes obsolete, right? We hope that it's the least visited website in the world in short order. And so how do we take that experience that Avi had? How do we take that great value that he created and transfer that then to the next thing? How do we keep pushing the envelope? And again, that's why I entitled this "Do You?" It's got to go back and start with our passion again. And I have to say, I've got this win, I've got this experience, even if it wasn't on that scale, even if it's just an assignment I did in school or something I built after school or painted or created. But how do I transfer that to the next thing, to the next idea? That's how we push on innovation. And that's how you understand how to make your skills and your passions relevant. Next slide. So I just wanted to let you know we are more than enough. This is a picture of our young people in our morning circle. Dr. Moses did reference Ubuntu, and Ubuntu is actually one of our guiding principles. I am because we are, and this is kind of our image representation, our graphical representation of I am because we are. We believe that each of us is precious, and then each of us together is precious. We're more than enough, so we don't have to look over our shoulders or look at a different part of the map to wish we could be like that. Whatever we have, wherever we are, that's more than enough. It's not equal, it's not even equitable, right? But still, it's enough for us to bring about our brilliance, to really demonstrate our potential and to make an impact. And so I just want you to remember that. And then hopefully final slide. And for those of you who are looking for things to do or looking to be inspired, I did want to point you to an event we're doing ongoing from July 6th through July 31. Every weekday this month, we have dynamic speakers speaking about different aspects of work which are related to technology. We actually have thematic categorization. So Monday is sports day, Tuesday is finance and investment or secure the bag days. We say Wednesday is social impact or social change Wednesday. Thursday is emerging technology. And Friday is entertainment and culture. And these are industry leaders and technologists and people speaking about their experience in these spaces. We've got some great speakers today and the rest of the week, but also for the following 2 weeks. So if you are able to follow that link or even just globaltechslam.com, you can register. It's at 10 a.m. Pacific each day, which I believe would be 7 p.m. CET, if I have that right. And so you're welcome to join. It's free. You don't have to attend every day or any of the days, but just wanted to make that opportunity available if you're interested. So thank you very much for allowing me to present. Thank you for your time, and thank you for a great session today.
Thank you, Brandon. A lot of information and thoughts about the work you currently do. Empowering minority youth and integrating them into technology and beyond. And the applications are for our fellow youth beyond this. And that's what we really like from our expert panelists is, in addition to the work that they do, but how can they apply it to our young panelists and to the panel, to the audience. So we will finalize our final speaker. After this, we will revert to Q&A. Mr. Shangshik Rai, who is the Chief Technology Officer at the UN International Computing Center. We are honored to have you. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to what you have to share with us today.
Thank you very much, Alexander, and a very warm welcome to everyone. As the last speaker, I have an advantage and a disadvantage. A lot of what I wanted to say is probably already been spoken of, but I can also sort of weave through the thread that we've all heard over this webinar. Next slide, please. Lovely. So If I again continue with the definition of social capital, it will become an economics 101 class. You have heard what social capital is. I just want to sort of pick up one or two threads out of this, because that is the thread of what I wanted to speak about today. So capital, which is a very, very economic term, means a stock of resources. So when we talk about social capital, and there was an earlier reference to the definition from OECD, which is what I'm also referring to over here, that it's the potential that we together as human beings can achieve. Next slide, please. So before we dive into what we as human beings can achieve together, I mean, you've heard some amazing individual stories. You've heard some amazing stories about how when we get together with what we can achieve. There's one important aspect I think I would like to highlight when we talk about social capital, which is when we talk about success, when we talk about some of these stories, what is it that is happening for us as a human society? Because one of the definitions or the needs of social capital is well-being. And that well-being has to spawn across not just as us as an individual, but across the community, across the society that we are living in. So there's a piece of sort of word, another economic definition called the public goods, which now has been extended to a digital word called the digital public goods. So the UN Secretary General last year had set up a panel for digital cooperation. And again, referring to some of the questions in the chat window where people are asking about how can in least developed countries, how can in developing nations, can they access some of these technologies? Some of these questions were being looked at the UN level. And one of the concepts that emerged out of this was the idea of digital public goods. Essentially, digital technology and content that is freely and openly available with minimal restrictions. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we've heard a lot of success stories on individual pieces people have been doing. We've sort of understand what social capital is, but how do these two things come together? What is the coding connection with the social capital? And coding, again, as you've seen in the literal sense, is really writing software. We've seen a broader definition of coding today, but if I sort of look at what may be pertinent to our discussion here, in a very literal sense, that's writing software. So if I look at social capital as a means of potential, as of way of doing something, as producing goods and services and well-being, and I look at coding, writing software, I do believe they do fundamentally connect. And we have very good examples of how they have contributed to the well-being of the society of the human beings. So I do think that social capital can both be consumed as well as be created through coding, through writing software. Next slide, please. Right, so what is that bridge between these two concepts? Broadly, what I wanted to talk about was open collaboration. I mean, if we hand the floor over back to Avi, and I hope and I assume that a lot of what he did on his website was based on using some of the open source technologies that were there. So essentially this collaboration across human beings with open content, open source software, open standardization, to my mind, that is the fundamental piece when we talk about coding for social capital. That is what lays down the foundation. If you start looking at how can we create, contribute, or consume social capital through coding, if any of you out here today listening on this call start an open source project or an open source content creation platform, which has certain ideas, certain beliefs, or certain end goals, I'm sure there are others around the world who would like to get into that idea. And as it was shown earlier today, that idea of social cohesion is very, very different. Today, the word is really, really very small than it was 30, 40 years ago. So if your idea is liked by others, that automatic upscaling, that co-creation automatically starts happening and the project gains traction. Similarly, if you join any of these open source projects, you're actually contributing towards social capital. But while we are doing all this, let's say a contribution of our time, our knowledge in creating software which others can use, these digital public goods, which others can use, how is it really going to contribute towards well-being? I'm hoping that a number of listeners on this call, their intent is not just, how can I just work for myself, but also how can I work for others? So how can I contribute towards the well-being of others? Next slide, please. Thank you. So, and to my mind, that contribution that one can make towards social capital by coding is by contributing to open source projects. I believe fundamentally that the whole concept of social capital, which revolves around the network, the connection of common beliefs, common norms, there is no better place to demonstrate that than in what you see if you're a coder, if you're a developer in open source projects. That little graph that you see on the bottom right, that is the number of open source contributors that are on just one platform, that's GitHub. I assume and I hope that a number of you know what GitHub platform is. It's sort of become the de facto website to go to for anybody who's looking to code, write open source projects, contribute to open source projects. And actually a lot of content on GitHub is about learning on how to code as well. So I'd really encourage for people who don't know about GitHub to go there. If you want to start learning how to code, you will see a lot of content on GitHub about coding. And earlier in the call, in the webinar, it was also mentioned, for example, you see young kids coming in and coding. I've had some experience with that. If you again want to really, if you're young or if you know somebody who's really young, and when I say young, I'm talking about like 4-year-old kids, on how to start learning how to code, look up on something called the Scratch project from MIT. Again, it's a very, very simple interface. Anybody can start learning how to program and code. And it will also help you, then understand the concepts of programming. But coming back to that social capital piece, if you look at this website that I have listed over here, and the data that is being displayed on this website is very interesting, because what we'll find, as you can see in that graph, that dark purple line below represents open source contributors from United States. So what GitHub was trying to understand is how global is the presence of coding in open source projects. And that number you see on the top, which is actually going to close to 2.5 million contributors today on GitHub platform, they're coming from all sorts of parts of the world. They're coming from Western Africa, they're coming from South Africa, they're coming from Far East Asia, they're all global. So in that sense, if we are talking about inclusiveness, I think this is one of the best examples of how we can contribute across the globe in a very, very inclusive manner. The second point I wanted to make is the idea about open source and whether it succeeds or not. And I think that, to my mind, that debate is well settled. Today, some very large scale, very complex pieces of software are written using open source. But the big challenge for open source contributions, open content contribution, has been so far till date that it is software written by the techies for the techies. So likes of Avi or Sarah, if she was back into coding, would be probably using some of these pieces of open source software. They would be using it to write their own websites, write their own web applications. There are very far and few between success stories about software being written for social sector, for the well-being, and to be utilized in solving problems in some of the areas, for example, where UN works. And sort of having this privilege that I work for the International Computing Center of United Nations, whereby we provide IT services across the UN and to all the different UN agencies, we can very well see the challenge that lies if you have to really solve some issues of delivering software in let's say, parts of Africa. And I'm sure all of you know, UN really operates in some very, very difficult conditions. So, I may have the luxury of sitting here with a 1 gig fiber optic internet connection. We really have to write software and for it to solve problems where it has to work, where the internet connectivity might not just be there. And that in those areas, I think that contribution is really, really needed from the youth to start looking at social sector software and bring those stories. I would also encourage you to go and look for this report, which GitHub came out a couple of months back. It's the GitHub Social Impact Team. They've done a report on the use of open source software in the social sector and the challenges this is facing. Next slide, please. Thanks. So I'll close quickly in the interest of time and just sort of encourage all the participants on this call. If you are interested in coding for social impact or coding for social capital, what is it that you can do? The title of the slide is actually in Latin. And in plain English, this simply means standing on the shoulders of giants. You've heard some very, very interesting stories over here today. You've heard how, for example, Avi, he mentioned he has redone his own website 5 times. You've heard how Sarah took skills from one point on how to sort of do hackathon into real world, into fashion pieces. I think at least the way, if I have to sort of characterize that, and maybe this was not explicit to these individuals, might have been implicit, but this is one key point is focus on what is called human-centered design. So as I said, there's a lot of software out there today which is written for developers, for coders to use and write other applications. If you're looking to contribute, if you're looking to learn coding, do not focus your energies. I'm sure there are a lot of problems even in those areas to be solved, but if you really go back and solving some of those problems, you're not really providing value to the community, not really providing value to the world. So pick up these tools that are already there and then focus on real problems. Focus on what your customers, what your clients want. So like in case of Avi, he said, the first number one thing he realized is people visit from mobile phones. They're looking for aggregated information. So rather than sort of focusing on whether this has to be in Python or C or JavaScript or whatnot, the focus was, this is what the first piece of information to the user should be. Now, he did crack a few jokes about government websites, and the joke I crack about UN websites is, if you think one government's website is bad, imagine 200 governments working together and see how their websites will look like. So yes, from that point of view, even our websites suck. But there's a whole reason behind it, how these organizations functions, does it take time for such complex intergovernmental beasts to do fancy stuff. But you have that independence, you have that energy, you have that vigor and the know-how and the will to do it. So really, as Brandon was mentioning, together we can solve those problems. So look on those pieces, capitalize on your social connections, think of who you are targeting, try and build solutions, and try and contribute back. Think of open collaboration if you're thinking of social capital, to create digital public goods using the social capital, from the social capital, and for a real social impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rai. I think you gave us some excellent tools, not just in terms of as active programming for certain ages with GitHub, but also for younger individuals like Scratch, which is an excellent program, as well as talking about this kind of idea of an opportunity cost when it comes to trying to get engaging with coding, in the sense that the opportunity that you have with the individuals around you, with the people that you're listening to, and with the participants that are the audience that is listening to you, there are a lot of opportunities out there that you can use to try to do social good. I mean, if you think about, Avi started this in January before COVID-19 was considered a pandemic. What if he hadn't started a website? Think about the impact that would have had on so many individuals. So I think I want to bring that out and kind of flesh that out a little bit further. And hopefully we can continue that point and others in our Q&A session. So moving forward towards our Q&A, I'd like to go ahead and open the floor for questions. I'm going to start taking some of the questions that have been submitted and start providing them to some panelists. If there are panelists who wish to ask a question to another panelist, you can inform me via the chat, and we will begin from there. So our first question that we have noted was addressed to Michelle Sun. Michelle, are you here?
Yes.
Excellent. So the question was, what would you suggest, and I know that there's a couple other panelists that started to flesh it out, but what would you suggest that individuals could do, what types of tools they could use if they're not from developed countries. You had a list of tools and you talked about their applications, but are there any other tools that someone from a WOEG, a non-Western country would be able to apply?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that, from starting to learn coding, there are a lot of resources that are global and free online. So I would definitely start with those resources to gain a basic understanding of what coding means and what coding can get you, like a basic coding skill can get you to. And just now, another speaker also mentioned about human-centered design, understanding these concepts when it comes to designing solutions for your particular community is really useful and really powerful. And then next, I would also look at other developing countries, like, for example, the mobile technology side is really, actually some of the developing countries have more advanced mobile applications and mobile technology than a lot of developed countries. For example, we've been seeing great innovations in mobile commerce in farms, in Africa, for example, that people are actually not like skipping the entire desktop and go directly to their smartphones. Similarly, in China, we've also seen like the company I mentioned, Pinduoduo, which is a social commerce app that, in the States or in Europe, you don't actually see similar, not a lot of similar apps right now in the commerce side. So I would try to read up on different countries and different leading applications and software companies around the world and draw insights from there. And, I think that the developed countries companies might get more press just because they also have access to media more, or like the mainstream media tend to cover these more. At the same time, there are also a lot of inspiration that we can draw from innovations around different parts of the world.
Excellent, thank you very much. I'd like to go ahead and move forward with the next question addressed to Sarah Griesdorf. How are you sewing your experience back into female spaces, and more specifically to young females interested in owning their business? That's a question from one of our audience members.
Great. Thank you, Alexander, and thank you to the individual who asked this question. I think it's so important to think about as you're climbing up this entrepreneurship ladder, how to bring others up with you. The way you've kind of approached it from my perspective and from my company Holdet's perspective is that in April, when COVID really started shutting things down in the United States, we launched a membership program for women who are entering the workforce for the first time, roughly 18 to 24 years old, to provide them with mentorship and resources for that transition. And many of our members are entrepreneurs, and so we're matching them with mentors who can help them develop their businesses and workshops to help them do that as well. At Boston University, I participated in the Summer Accelerator program that they have my freshman year summer, and since then I have gone back and mentored other female entrepreneurs who are getting started in the space. And I think for anyone who's on the call and is interested in entrepreneurship, just remember that everyone's on their own journey, and so any advice that you can provide to people who are just getting started is really beneficial. And I try to be as open with my experiences and my struggles as I can be to be of the most help to people who I'm speaking to.
Thank you, Sarah. We have a question for Malte. I'd like to, I think the question, there it is, okay. So the question was, how do we incentivize hackathons to address social good? I think that's moving from your concept of what you were talking about before. And I think they wanted to kind of get essentially some thoughts regarding that. Like how can we utilize hackathons, especially how can you move sponsors, maybe addressing corporate social responsibility organizations, or what you do to help allow hackathons to address Malte, are you with us? I think you might be on mute.
My audio is extremely cutting out. Could you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Sure. The general basis of the question was, how can you utilize hackathons towards social good? Like, what can you do to make it easier for hackathons to address societal issues?
Now, I think the most important thing is to focus on a special issue, like have the whole hackathon built around this issue. Like before the hackathon starts, analyze in the beginning meeting, just like present the issue and talk about raising the point to solve this. Then get the community, the people in the hackathon fixed on it so they can work on it. So I think it's important to like just yeah, and explain why it's important to work on it.
Thank you. I'd also like to, Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for that in terms of how to leverage hackathons. I think, Andrew, I think it might be good as well if you would expand upon that question a little bit as well. I know you've ran some hackathons and you have, and how do you try to engage members and get young people excited about coding?
Yeah, for sure. So Helix had a hackathon in early April and one of the themes was COVID-19 and the other was environmental sustainability and biology. So yeah, we really want to be engaging young people in learning how to code, especially because it can seem intimidating at first, especially for people who didn't like sort of grow up in an environment where they were experienced to coding. So it's like, for one, we try to emphasize that beginners are always welcome. We offer free beginner workshops during our hackathons. We actually reserve special awards for people who are first-time coders or first-time hackathon participants. So that way they can feel encouraged that like it's okay that it's your first time learning how to write a website. You don't have to worry about competing with the kid who's been programming since age 7, things like that. We've also been trying to start early, starting young with younger students like 4th, 5th grade with our online coding classes, like which are once or twice a week. And we start with like really basic Python. We're starting to get into Scratch, which is I think like Mr. Shashank mentioned, or someone else mentioned Scratch, because that's like a really great interface for getting people interested. We're also working on delivering our curriculum through different vehicles. So a lot of students, they're interested in building video games or like mobile apps that they can actually play with on their phone. So I think that's also a great way to do that.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd like to go ahead and transition the floor to Sebastian Hofbauer, who is the program coordinator at the United Nations Institute of Training and Research. He is one of the partners and co-founders of the 1M 2030 initiative, which, as I have mentioned, and the purpose of this organization is to scale and develop 1 million youth leaders and social entrepreneurs towards UN Sustainable Development Goals. Look forward to hearing you engage with the audience.
Thank you so much, Alexander. As you mentioned, I co-founded 1M 2030 and also work for a UN agency, UNITAR. And as such, I'm very happy to see the incredible work that is being done by all of our young panelists today. And I just have a kind of a small question for you, for all of you panelists. What can, in your opinion, what can the UN and other global organizations or movements do in very concrete terms to support you in what you are doing? Thank you.
Sebastian, can I answer this question?
Please, Moses, go ahead.
So I think what the UN and the United Nations Institute of Training and Research, under the very capable guidance of the distinguished diplomat there, Mr. Nikhil Seth, who is the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of the United Nations Institute of Training and Research, is doing in terms of capacity building with the youngsters, with the international education curriculum boards, the schools, getting schools on board. So if we can have collaborations orchestrated by some of our youth members and panelists to come on board, bringing awareness as one of the main fortes of the IM 2030, because the 1 million youth leaders are all in schools and colleges and universities. So if there's some sort of an orchestrated movement to reach out to schools and universities and colleges, I think we can have a whole, I think, a buildup of youth taking up entrepreneurship projects, and also study tours and visits and many more such webinars regionally organized, and study visits after the COVID situation is over. So I think your team and with Julia Gent, I think this is possible. And with Mr. Alex Mejia, the Director for Division of Social and People Inclusion, this dream can be a reality.
Excellent. I'd also like to pose a question to Brandon. If you're, Brandon, are you here?
I am.
Excellent. So the question that I've had is kind of really regarding how do you believe that the work that you currently do, empowering specifically Black minority youth, how do you think you are feeling how do you believe that you're feeling an inequity gap? Do you believe that by getting minority youth into coding, you are decreasing job inequity? You're providing more access? And if so, what are the effects of that you're seeing?
Sure, thank you for the question. I'd say the way we look at this work, first and foremost, is we're seeking to wrap our arms around the young people in our program, particularly in our most intensive cohort. We're seeking to provide as much holistic support for them as possible to realize their potential and achieve their dreams, whatever those dreams may be. And so some of them know for sure they'd like to focus on technology as a career. They'd like to be engineers or developers, et cetera, but many of them don't know what they want to do, and probably just as many know they definitely do not want to be software engineers and what have you. And so the first thing we do is help them see help them see themselves as leaders, as change agents, see the greatness in themselves. And that may sound warm and fuzzy, and yet it's very difficult to accomplish anything worthwhile, anything of meaning, without having a positive self-concept first, and being able to understand that as an individual, I'm extremely capable of achieving whatever my goal might be. The second thing, with respect to, and this is still in the context of equity, as you mentioned, but the second thing we seek to do is to help them see the brilliance in each other, in their communities, in their respective networks, and make sure that they understand that, again, they are more than enough, and so are their peers. And this is important because much of the lack of equity in representation in companies and in hiring and retention and advancement, et cetera, have just as much to do, if not more so, and I'll just say have likely more to do with the decisions of those at those companies, the leaders at those companies. They have more to do there than they do with the capabilities or potential of the young people we serve. The greatest indication there is many of the companies, particularly here in the Bay Area and the United States and Silicon Valley, many of those companies espouse values around the importance of being able to learn on the job, growing together, moving fast and breaking things. The idea being that you don't have to have all the knowledge in order to do. And yet with that in mind, so many young people, and not just people from Black communities, but across the spectrum, so many people do not get that opportunity. And so what it takes is, there's got to be opportunities, and young people have to get a chance. That having been said, the work we do first and foremost is to help remember that if you're not getting it in one environment, you must create a chance in another. And we have people today joining from all over the world who are in communities where they've done brilliant things and figured out tremendous solutions without having to wait for a change of heart from some CEO in Silicon Valley. And so I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And by that, I mean the dynamic can create great things and important things wherever you are, and you can create a network and a great business and do work. And we just heard a great answer about mobile payments, right, in rural areas and on the continent, et cetera. So the work we do around is to create as much people, expose our partners and networks and corporations and businesses to our young people, but make sure our young people are empowered to chart that path however they need to, whether it's going to be through a corporate route or something more conventional, or whether it's going to be through their own peer network, building a larger community that they can leverage to make meaningful solutions.
Thank you. I'd like to open the floor to our audience, our panelists here. Are there any expert panelists, UNITAR program coordinators, or youth panelists that have any questions for anyone else, or any thoughts that want to be shared? All right. With that, I would like to go ahead and conclude our webinar for Coding with Social Capital. I'm very thankful for everyone for joining from all around the world. And let's continue and keep this conversation going. It's on the internet, meaning it's alive. So let's continue proceeding moving forward. And thank you everyone very much. And we look forward to seeing you again in our next webinar.